final morning session here. We're going to look at, we're going to try to unpack, get through two letters, starting in chapter 3, Jesus addressing Sardis and the church in the city of Sardis and the church in the city of Philadelphia, and try to draw some things out for us for the last morning session. And then tonight we'll deal with the last church, the church of Laodicea, and Jesus has a lot to say to them too. So let's jump into this. Again, let me just frame what Jesus is doing. Again, he's trying to explain that there's a deeper reality behind the reality that we see and experience in life. A lot of the book of Revelation hovers around that idea, and especially these letters. Let me illustrate that this way. One day, my daughter, who has beautiful blue eyes and blonde hair, came up to me and she said, "How did I get these beautiful blue eyes?" She's a narcissist and egomaniac. And so she said, "How did I get these beautiful blue eyes?" Now, there's a couple of answers to that. I could say, well, your mother and I just happen to have the proper recessive genes that when our DNA came together in some form, it gave you the ability to have blue eyes. Or I could say that God did it. Now, which one of those two things would be true? Both of them would be true. Equally true. But here's the question in life. Which one of those two things is more fundamental? What's more important? What's more weighty? What's the reality behind the reality that actually matters? And most of us, yes, most of us go through life and settle for the first option. And we just see life kind of as we go and in black and white. And God offers us HD, color, we're going to see conquering, flourishing, and we settle for kind of some bland, half in, half out. Jesus going all in. He's going, you got to go, got to take whatever's out, bring it in, or maybe you're out altogether. And that's his point to these churches. You got to start to think about what's more fundamental, not just what's the easiest thing to do in life and what the easiest answers are in life. And so he says to the church in Sardis, to the angel in the church in Sardis, chapter 3, verse 1. Write the words of him who has the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars. I know your works. Right? Here's a God who sees us, who knows us. Doesn't matter the lies you tell yourself. Doesn't matter the lies you tell your friends. The lies you tell your neighbors. The lies you tell your coworkers. The lies you tell your spouse and your kids. I know. He says, I know. I see through it all. I know who you are in the dark. And he says, you have the reputation of being alive, but you are dead. And so the reality is that this church, this group of people, maybe not unlike many of us in this room, cared more about their reputation, about being alive, than actually being alive. They cared more about looking alive and looking spiritually deep and looking like they loved Jesus on the outside than they really did about knowing him and walking with him when no one was looking. And the question of Christianity is, who are you when nobody's looking? Who are you in the dark? Who are you when nobody can see the great things that you do? Right? This is why Jesus constantly talked about, he called out the whole Pharisaical mode of existence where people would look really good on the outside. And remember, he comes to the Pharisees in the book of Matthew, and he says, you know, you get all this acclaim for all these words that you use, you make your prayers really wordy. And he says, but that means nothing. What really matters is that you come before the Father with a clean heart and you pray to him out of authenticity. And he's coming at this whole, you know, I actually heard one of my teachers told a story one time that he was speaking at a church, and one of the guys got up and he started praying, and he started to try to sound really eloquent and use a lot of big words and concepts, you know, kind of going directly against what Jesus talks about. And he got up and he started talking about how Satan is like an octopus, and he's got the world in his testicles. Alright? And my teacher's like, oh my gosh, what's happening right now? We're in church and you're talking about Satan's testicles. I don't know what's going on. Some of you are still like, what? It's early. So don't be wordy, right? Don't care about your reputation, what's on the outside. That's what he's going, man, some of you cared so much about your reputation for being alive, but the reality is you're actually dead. And of course, there's lots of Christian expressions of this. I wrote down a couple of examples. Actually, someone told me yesterday that they went to a church on Easter, and the church that they went to on Easter just this past year was it was a really generic just denomination, and they just said, hey, you know, Jesus whether Jesus rose from the dead in history or whether he just rose from the dead metaphorically, it doesn't really matter. What really matters is that he's alive in your heart and that every day is an Easter and all that kind of, and that's kind of what happens to the church at times. It becomes very watered down and weak sauce because we don't want to, as we're going to see Jesus does, we don't want to offend people. We don't want to exclude people. And so we kind of water it down. So she said it was very bizarre going to that in the morning and hearing that because some family had invited them there and it was all very generic and it was flowers and it was whatever you believe, whichever God that you want to pray to today because it's Easter, that's fine. And all of that. And then she came to Village and I was up screaming for an hour about how if the historical resurrection is not true, then it's all a sham and you all need to go home and none of this matters. And so she said, it's just this contrast of like, is this real or isn't it real? And if it's not, if it's just a metaphor, then who cares? Why even wake up on Sunday morning and go to church? Why give money? Why go to a country and die for this? If it's just a metaphor, who cares? Right? Why roll it about? Why give? Why serve? Why give? This shouldn't cost your life. It's just a metaphor. It's just whatever God you want to believe in. And so there are people who they care more about their reputation, about being alive, but you're actually dead. So he claims that he says you're dead. And the way that you know you're dead, and there's all kinds of examples throughout history. During World War II, when Nazi Germany was on the rise in Germany, and there's the German church, more than half the pastors of those German churches just went along with Hitler and the plan for the Third Reich. And men like Karl Barth and Dietrich Bonhoeffer stood up against them and they said, no, this is actually wrong, this is the right way, this isn't the right way. And so they laid out, but the church was dead. The church was dead in Germany. They couldn't see, they couldn't feel, they couldn't understand the gospel, they couldn't understand the persecution of Jews and exclusion of Jews, and what the Third Reich was doing was a bad thing because they were only alive in reputation. They weren't really alive. And Bonhoeffer spoke into that and he said, guys, we've got to get a sensitivity here. We've got to understand that Jesus is looking at us and he's saying, hey, we're actually functioning more dead than alive. And so I remember when we decided to plant Village Church, we were living out in a little town, nice little town, and we moved into South Surrey, which is about 35 minutes away, which is another nice town. And I remember our friends who lived in the town we moved from said, I can't believe that you're moving into this town. This is such a big cost to your life. And he said, I could never move. I could never leave this town and move to that town, even if God called me, because I wouldn't want to lose my view of Grouse Mountain. And I remember thinking, dude, you're dead.
Yeah, big time.
If you're not willing to leave a view of Grouse Mountain, you think you're alive, but you're dead. Jesus gets up and he tells his people, you got to go, you got to die, you got to baptize in the name of the Father and the Son, and you're not willing to leave a view. You don't even understand Christianity because it's the cost of all of these things. And so he's saying, man, you got to make sure that you're actually alive, because some of you are just alive in reputation. You're actually alive. You're just alive in reputation. And we need this. This is a beautiful wake-up call, because here's what he says in verse 2. He says, wake up and strengthen what remains. So some of these churches, the message has been, be encouraged in the midst of persecution. Some others have been like, hey, make sure you're faithful to the end. This one is a call to wake up to the sleeping church. Yeah. Some of you are just in neutral and you're drifting and you're asleep at the wheel. And his message is, wake up, wake up, wake up. And because you've become asleep, man. You're just sleeping in the midst of. And in some ways, and this is why you need Jesus from outside of you to come in and tell you this, is because you can't feel it in yourself. You don't know when you've fallen asleep. This is the terrifying thing. This is like Inception, right? Has anyone seen the movie Inception here? All right, good. If you haven't seen it, you should probably just leave now and go watch it, because it's going to change your life. Change my life. And so, Inception is this movie where you're kind of in these dreams. You don't know if you're dreaming. And so when you could be in a dream, have you ever had those dreams where you're in a dream and then you wake up and then you think, oh my goodness, that was a terrible dream. And then you keep walking and then there's a talking cat with an umbrella. You're like, okay, maybe I'm still dreaming. Those dreams within a dream, those kind of things. That's what Inception's all about, is that you don't even know. So it's this character and he's going through, and every time you die, you actually wake up. And that's what it takes, because in dreams when you're falling and you're falling and you're falling, and then just before you hit the ground, you wake up, right? And so the reality is in this, it plays with you because he's within dreams, and by the end of the movie, you don't even know if the whole thing's been a dream. because his wife at some point says, man, we got to go back to our children. And she jumps off a building, and he goes, no, no, no. And he's living in this layer, but you don't know by the end of the movie whether he's been living in the layer the whole movie and whether she actually popped back up to reality. Anyway, go watch the movie. But the point is that you don't, the point is that you need somebody outside of you to come and say, wake up. You don't know. You're in this, man. You're in dream world. And you need to get out of it. You need to wake up. You need to pop out of it. So you need someone from the outside to come in and tell you that, because sometimes your own feeling, you can't sense it. You can't sense it. A couple Christmases ago, I went home to see my grandfather, and my grandfather was not, I've told the story before at Village, so if you go to Village, you know it, but we called my grandfather, who's 92 years old. He was living he's lived in the same apartment for 60 years, and he wasn't there, and the number had been canceled, and I was like, oh my goodness, where's my grandfather? So finally we tracked him down to this house. And I said, hey, some lady picked up, and I'm like, hello? She's like, hello? And I'm like, hello, is my grandpa there? She's like, oh yes, he's right here. And I get on the phone with my grandpa, you okay, what's going on? And he's like, oh, don't worry, they have me in this house. And there's a scam that goes on in Toronto where this woman had kind of got close to him where he lived in his room, his apartment. And then she said, well, let's buy a house. And then he throws down half or 3/4 of the house, and they bought this massive house in Vaughan. This place called Vaughan, beautiful $600,000 house. And so he paid half of it. And so they're emptying his bank account. They're totally scamming him. So I said, Grandpa, I'm coming. Don't worry, I'm coming to save you. And he's been kidnapped. All right, he's been kidnapped. And so I said, don't worry, you stay where you are. I'm coming to save you. So my brother and I show up, and he's sitting there. He's all comfortable in this house, and we said, come on, we gotta go, we gotta go. And he's like, no, I don't want to go. We're like, what do you mean you don't want to go? Come on, we gotta go. These guys have abducted you, kidnapped you, they emptied your bank account. And he says, Mark, no, I like it here. And there was this, and so I went in thinking, I mean, here's the vision in my mind. I was like gonna rope down the side and kick in windows, all black, me and my brother, and kind of go in and kind of pick up my grandpa and run out. And it was going to be this crazy town. And what ended up happening is I helped the guy carry in a massive 70-inch big screen TV that my grandfather had bought him into the house. So it just looked different than what I experienced. Because they were very nice people. So, but that's the point, man. So we're driving home, and my brother's like, how frustrating is it that we can't rescue my grandfather from clear, he's being taken. And it hit me. I was like, he doesn't want to be rescued, man. We need to tell him. We need to tell him to wake up, but he doesn't want to be rescued because he has this comfort place that he's in. And even though it's ultimately a bad thing for him, because he's getting, in the moment, he's like, you know what? The temporary feels good right now, so don't wake me up. I'm good. Just let me fall asleep here. And this is what happens, right? Jesus comes to us, and maybe many, many times in your life, he's come, he's tried to wake you up, and he's trying to go, man, wake up. You're sleeping. And so he's coming again to you. This morning, he's giving you another chance. Some of you, neutral at the wheel, you don't have a passion for him, you don't love him, you're not listening to him. He's saying, listen. Wake up. This is your time. This is your moment. Okay, wake up. He says, and strengthen what remains and is about to die. Christianity is not just about, I made a decision for Christ at one point and now I'm moving on with my life. It's about strengthening what is there. That's what discipleship is. You have to grow. You have to grow. You have to become more like him. You need to look more like him a year from now when you're back here at Green Bay than you feel and look right now. You need to be more sensitive to sin by next year than you are right now. You need to be more holy in God, look more like Jesus with your time and your energy in your life than you do right now. You need to strengthen what is there. And this is why Jesus says in Acts chapter 1, the Spirit. Because some of you are like, how am I going to be strengthened? How am I going to grow? How am I going to do this? Jesus says, look, I'm not like other religions where I just tell you to do a bunch of things and then hopefully you can figure it out. I give you the Spirit to empower you to do it. If you want to try to do discipleship without the very resource that I'm offering you, this is what he's talking about in Acts chapter 1 when he says, one day the Spirit is going to drop on you and empower you unto godliness and mission. This is what is on offer for you. And some of us deny the life of the Spirit, deny the life of the Spirit, deny the life of the Spirit. But he's empowered you to have it. Some of us are still living in, it's very interesting. If you read the opening chapters all the way through the book of Deuteronomy, what you get is a whole bunch of rules, right? You're supposed to do this, and you're supposed to do this, and mildew disease, and keep those people out, and do this. You get all this law, this commandments, all these things. And over again, it begins to feel like it's crushing you and crushing you and crushing you. And by the end of Deuteronomy, it's very interesting. The whole book ends by saying this. You know the last bunch of chapters where I've been talking to you? You'll never be able to do any of that stuff. So, one day, I'm going to send the Spirit. And the Spirit's going to come down and take your heart of stone and make it a heart of flesh, and it's going to empower you to be obedient. And it ends with this hope of one day the Spirit's going to drop and actually help you to strengthen, to actually be a disciple, to be a learner, to grow in Christ. And so he says, be strengthened, strengthen what remains and is about to die. For I have not found your works complete in the sight of God. And then he says this, remember, verse 3, remember then what you received and heard. Keep it and repent. If you will not wake up. Now, here's the warning. If you're sitting here and you're asleep at the wheel and you're all about reputation and you're all about the external, and Jesus is starting to press you and you feel something that's kind of irking, but you continue to push it off, he says this. Listen to this crazy warning. I will come like a thief. Now, this was very important to the people of Sardis because they were built on this cliff. And no one ever properly attacked them and took them over except twice. And the 2 times people took them over, they came at night and they climbed up the cliff. And they came and they surprised them at night. And so the story was is they surprised us like thieves in the night. We can't believe it. We got to watch. We got to make sure we watch. We can't fall asleep. We got to watch. We got to watch. And so he says, I'm going to come again. I'm going to come like a thief. And you will not know at what hour I will come against you. But I'm going to come for you. And so here's what we say. Man, there are times when our death is simply Jesus going, okay, that's enough. That's enough. Enough playing games. But there's a grace in it because there are times when our death means he came for us before we got too far astray. That's a beautiful grace. Okay, okay, enough of this. I see the trajectory of where this is going. I'm going to come like a thief in the night, and I'm taking you. That's how he works. And then he says, verse 4, yet you have still a few names in Sardis, people who have not soiled their garments, right, being faithful. And they will walk with me in white, for they are worthy. Here's a question. Are you worthy? Are you worthy? Are you worthy of the name? Sometimes we just settle. Sometimes we just settle. Let me give you an example of settling. Now, there's a guy named Mickey Cohen, and he was a gangster in the 1940s in Los Angeles, and he became a Christian. Hardcore gangster, made a public commitment to Christ, newspapers, everything, and he said, I've become a Christian now. But a few years later, they kind of came to Mickey and they said, hey, Mickey, you're still doing some gangster stuff. Killing people, smuggling drugs. And he said, yeah, I'm a Christian gangster. What's the problem? There's Christian athletes and Christian movie stars. What's the problem? And they said, oh, no, Mickey, you can't continue to kill people and smuggle drugs and follow Jesus. That's not how it works. And Mickey said, oh, okay, then I'm out. I don't want to abandon my friends. I don't want to abandon what I do. This is what I know. This is what I do. And I'm out. And Chuck Colson wrote a book, and he talks about Mickey Cohen in the book. Those of you who know who Chuck Colson is. And he writes this. He says, Cohen was simply echoing the millions of Christians who, though unwilling to admit it, through their very lives posed the same question. Not about being Christian gangsters, but about being a Christianized version of what we already are and what we are determined to remain. What has changed about your life? Are you worthy of the name? Does anyone even, if people lined up you beside everybody else they know, are you just a Christianized version of who you already are, already were 10 years ago, but you slap some different doctrine in your head, or you vote different, or you have a Jesus fish on the back of your car that tells everybody, I'm a Christian, but that's the only thing about you? I'm such a bad driver, I don't put Jesus, people would lose their faith based on my driving. I put Mark of the Beast on the back and they go, oh, that's a Satan driver. If you're a Christianized version of what you already are and what you're just determined to remain, he's saying, man, you're not worthy. You got to be worthy of the name. You got to be worthy of the name. What changes about your life? Is there anything different about you? So he says, those who are worthy. And then he says this, verse 5. He says, the one who conquers will be clothed thus in white garments. The one who conquers. Here's the great vision that Jesus puts in front of you right now. He does not want you living a Christian life by the skin of your teeth. Bland, boring, mundane, some just little bit of yourself change. There was I don't know if it's appropriate to share this, but I shared it at a wedding the other day, so I guess it was appropriate there. It's here. I walked by a poster for a beer company a little bit ago, and I'll never forget the phrase, because it's a beautiful image of Christianity. It said, I would rather die of thirst than drink from the cup of mediocrity. I would rather die of thirst than drink from the cup of mediocrity. Here's what Jesus just said. He didn't say, I want you to be believers. I want you to be disciples. I want you to be, he says, I want you to be conquerors. What does it mean? You've got to conquer. You don't just survive, you flourish. That's what conquerors do in the midst of war. They don't die, they don't get scared, they don't run away, they conquer, they win. Sometimes we don't talk about ourselves as winners, we talk about ourselves as losers. Here's what he's saying. He's standing in front like a commander in front of a whole group of people. He's saying, you're winners. You're winners. It's time to win. It's time to flourish. It's time to live in victory. That's his point. It's conquerors who are going to win. It's conquerors who are going to join me in the next life. All right, down to Philadelphia. Verse 7, and to the angel of the church at Philadelphia write, the words of the Holy One and the True One. This is very interesting. Jesus claimed to be the True One. What does that mean? It means that everything that's not Jesus is what? False. Untrue. We live in a culture that wants to say this is true and that's true and everybody's true and everybody's right. He's just said no. By definition, if I'm the true one, then everything else, every other worldview, every other religion is false. Now, what our culture says about that is stop being narrow-minded. Stop being judgmental. Stop being exclusivist. Don't you understand? You're supposed to include everybody. I have family members who constantly say that to me. It's not right, Mark. Don't you understand? You're saying Jesus is the only way. That's not right. It's narrow-minded. It's judgmental. It's exclusivist to keep us out. You're totally wrong. Everybody else is right. And then I point out in that minute how ironic it is that who are they leaving out? Who are they judging? Me! Right? All the people who want to say exclusivism is wrong and judgmental and narrow-minded, I point out to them that they are in that moment being narrow-minded and judgmental and exclusivist by excluding my views. Because my views aren't right, but everybody else's are. But by default, it doesn't even work. And so Jesus says, I'm the true one. I'm actually true. And if I'm true, then everything else is wrong. And then he says this, the one who has the key of David. Now this is very interesting because this is a kind of a messianic throwback. And for us, living in Canadian culture, we're like Messiah language. That's old, dusty, and puts us to sleep. And it's boring. But here's the beautiful image of Messiah and key of David imagery. It was all about a king who was supposed to rule and reign and make the world right. And the reality is, you know, I was talking the first night, I think it was the first night at first, I was talking about Tolkien. And how there's, you know, Lord of the Rings, you take Lord of the Rings, what is that story about? Yeah, all of history is the story about the world looking for a king to rule properly. Right? That's what, when we turn on the TV right now, it's a gong show everywhere. What is it? When your life is a mess and it's not working out, what is it? It's your heart in life looking for a king. Yeah. To rule properly, and then you can sit under the king as he rules and reigns, and you sit under him and do what he tells you and asks you, and your life works out, and the world and history works out. Every story Watch Lord of the Rings, man, from the Nazgul and Sauron and the Ring and Saruman. Everybody's evil and fighting in the Ents and Isengard and total geeking out right now. And everybody's Middle Earth is a wreck. It's a disaster. No one knows what to do until what? The ring gets destroyed, and then Aragorn goes to Minas Tirith.
Here we go.
Right? and he sits, and there's coronation, and he sits on the throne. And then when he sits on the throne, see, it's the return of the king. The king's got to come back. And when the king comes back, then everything in Middle Earth will be peace. That's the point. It's the same with Shakespeare. Read King Lear. What's the problem in King Lear? The world's crazy because the king's crazy. But if the king stops being crazy and he sits on the throne and he rules right, then all the people will stop being crazy. And everyone will stop killing themselves. Because history is about looking for a king. And this is why when it says, hey, the Messiah is going to come and he's going to rule and he's going to reign, it means the earth, everything's going to work out and your life is going to get organized. Some of you don't have a king. Some of you claim by reputation to have a king, but you have no king. He doesn't actually rule in your life at all. And that's why your life is a mess. Because you're not taking cues from him, you're taking cues from everybody else. You're taking cues from the peasants. You're taking cues from the other crazy people. And you're just taking them and forget asking the king for advice. I'll look at my buddy, and if his life is like my life, we're good. We don't question it. And then the king's going, well, why would you listen to the peasants? Hey, I'm here. My voice. All right, he says, I know your works. Behold, I have set before you an open door, which no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power. Skip down, because we don't have time, and go to verse 12. I'll end with verse 12. He says this, the one who conquers, again, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Never shall he go out of it. It's very interesting because this city of Philadelphia would have earthquakes and everyone would have to leave and come back. And leave and come back all the time. And he gives them a picture of peace and security. And he says, I'm going to make you a temple. Now it's very interesting because it's very individualistic. Some of us sit here and we go, you know what? My grandfather's a Christian, so I'm a Christian. My church is Christian, so I'm a Christian. My spouse, my kids, all of that, so I must get kind of... And he goes, no, it's very individual. He says, I'll make him, singular, a pillar. The question is not what your spouse thinks about Jesus, or your kids, or your church. It's what you think. Right? This is why Jesus looks at his disciples. What do people say? Who do people say that I am? Some say your lives. Who do you say that I am? That's the question at the end of the day. Who do you say that he is? You don't get smuggled in. The question is, are you a pillar? You as an individual. And then there's this beautiful image of security. Some of you keep this stuff. You know, Tim Keller, who's a preacher in New York City, gives a great illustration for preachers, and I want to apply it to listeners, you guys. He says this. He says, if people are taking notes at the beginning of your sermon, that's really good. Because they're getting information, they're getting ideas. But if by the very end of your sermon they're still taking notes, you haven't done your job. Because what they should be doing by the end is sitting there like, except you're taking notes, but that's okay. They should be sitting there like, so I'm not doing it, I gotta fire myself. They should be like, give me, just land, like just give me the hope of the gospel, and I can't even think about notes right now because I'm in it. Some of you have kept Jesus at note-taking phase. There's only so long you can keep the question of whether you follow him at arm's length. There's only so long you can do that until you have to stop and put the pen down and go, now I receive. Now I receive. And some of you are in the position where you've just kept it here. Keep it cognitive, man. Keep it abstract, keep it arm's length. Because if it starts creeping in here, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so I just want to give you an opportunity for those of you who are just like, man, this week, all right, I'm getting challenged by Jesus. I want to give my life to him. And some of you need to start over and do that. So we're just going to pray. I'm going to give you a minute to just deal with you and God. Whatever God's been saying to you, speaking to you. Some of you you've never believed in Jesus, and this is an opportunity for you to